Welcome to End Times Examined. This is part 3 of our video series titled Bible Prophecy and the New World Order, Rise of Antichrist Kingdom. Part 1 we discussed what Bible prophecy is and its relevance. Part 2 we looked at what the New World Order is and the United Nations, one of the many organizations helping to build it. If you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, I encourage you to do so, as we're striving to maintain a linear path of reasoning while building on the evidence already established. So we ended our previous video with a brief look at the United Nations, which is one of the most influential organizations working to bring about a one-world society. The next group we will examine is the European Union, or the EU for short, as it's commonly referred to, represented by its blue flag with 12 stars. So this is a poster for what you would call a promotion for the European Union. It's this idea of a unification between different people groups into a single political body. Now there's two specific elements to this picture which we will take note of. 1. Notice the 11 stars above the structure in the sky. I believe it's safe to say, by the arrangement of the stars in this diamond pattern, that there is a 12th star behind the top of the structure completing the pattern, which represents the 12 stars of the European Union. Looking at the individual stars themselves, you can see that, unlike the 5-pointed stars represented on most national flags, these stars have 1 point down and 2 points up, or what is called an inverted 5-pointed star. We will see the significance of this later on in our video series. However, we want to see if this structure, this building, means anything and what it could represent. You can see to the left the image of the poster we just looked at, together with two different images. The far right image being the EU Parliament building in Strasbourg, France. The center image is the famous painting of the Tower of Babel by Bruegel. And most of you watching probably know the story of the Tower of Babel. But if not, here it is in a nutshell. After the Great Flood, the deluge, commonly referred to as Noah's flood, the descendants of Noah and his 3 sons were told to spread out and fill all the earth. Instead, post-flood humanity all congregated in the plain of Shinar, the land of Mesopotamia. This region comprised parts of modern-day Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Syria, and Turkey. In other words, what we call the Middle East. Nimrod, who was a type of Antichrist, was king of the empire which ruled over this area. It was during this time the people desired to build a great tower as a monument to their greatness and glory as opposed to God. God was not impressed, so he confused or changed the language which everyone spoke and understood to many different languages, and then scattered the people to all ends of the earth. This resulted in them abandoning the completion of the Tower of Babel, so named for its being constructed in the city of Babel. So you can see in all 3 of these images there is a building which appears unfinished or under construction. Now there's no one alive who could possibly have seen or known exactly what this ancient tower in Babel would have looked like. I personally don't think it looked like this, but that's just my opinion. But it appears obvious that the building on the poster models the EU Parliament building, and that this building bears a striking, almost identical resemblance to the painting by Bruegel titled The Tower of Babel. So what's really going on here? Is the European Union trying to identify with the ancient people in Babel, metaphorically building this tower by unifying all of Europe? Are they sympathizing with Nimrod and the rulers of that region in opposition to God? The short answer is yes, and I want to give you some further proof of this. Here is a picture of a statue that is placed outside this EU Parliament building in Strasbourg, France. Obviously, it is a woman sitting on top of a bull. There's no doubting what the statue is, but how does this relate to the European Union? Once again, we see the woman sitting on a bull pictured on a euro coin and on the cover of the German magazine Der Spiegel. If you look at the upper left of the coin, there is a word written in Greek letters which translates in English to the word Europa. Europa is the proper name of the woman depicted. So what's the story behind Europa? In short, Europa was a Phoenician princess who caught the eye of Zeus. He was enamored by her beauty, so in order to seduce her and hide it from his wife Hera, he transformed himself into a beautiful white bull. Europa admired the bull, and one day she climbed onto his back, and then he took off with her into the sea, whisking her away to the island of Crete. There he revealed his true self to her, and then had intimate relations with her. And you guessed it, from her namesake we get the name of the continent of Europe. Now the mythological story of Europa and Zeus is just that. Now whether or not this story has a basis in history or is simply an allegory, I'll leave that up to you. But is there another possible meaning of the woman and the bull? I believe there is. Let's look at Revelation 17, verses 3 through 5. Starting with verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now I know what you're thinking. The beast part of the sculpture that we looked at was just a bull. It didn't have 7 heads, only 1. It didn't have 10 horns, just 2. You're right. But before we declare case closed on this assumed connection, I want us to go back a few chapters and look at Revelation chapter 12. I only have verses 1 and 5 listed here, but I'm going to read for you 1 through 5. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Now I'm sure you noticed that the woman in this passage is depicted as having 12 stars on her head. Now this reminds us of the 12 stars on the EU flag. We also see in this passage the red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, we find out that the dragon gives its power to the beast, and this beast is identified with the dragon by also having 7 heads and 10 horns. Moving to verse 9 of chapter 12, we find that Satan is the red dragon. Now the red dragon wants to devour, safe to say, eliminate this child to be born of the woman. And we find out this child will grow up to be a man who will rule all the nations. The end of verse 5 gives a clue to help us understand the identity of the mother and child. The child was caught up to God and his throne. There is only one man taken up to God and his throne, and that is the God-man, the Lord Jesus Christ, who sits at the right hand of God the Father. Now we know Mary was Jesus' birth mother, but it's unlikely the woman in this vision refers to her specifically. Many believe the woman to be Israel, which would explain the 12 stars as representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus was without a doubt an Israelite from the tribe of Judah, God having ordained Israel to be the people from which Messiah would come. Others believe it refers to the church being described in the New Testament as the bride of Christ. Paul talks about in Romans how the church is made up of both Jews and Gentiles alike, both being one in Jesus Christ. I don't want to argue these two views, which can be a point of contention with some believers. Upholding either view, though, we can see easily how this woman, being the faithful woman who gives birth to Messiah, contrasts to the woman in chapter 17 who is the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, and in the very next verse described as being drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So to sum it up, we have the faithful woman with 12 stars above her head, and the unfaithful, abominable woman sitting on the beast, which gets its power from Satan, the red dragon. The statue, then, which sits in front of the EU's Tower of Babel-like Parliament building, is an amalgamation of these two opposites. And this statue is representative of the work of secret societies, organizations, and groups like the United Nations and European Union are doing to change society, and is commonly referred to as the Hegelian dialectic. Its philosophy gets its name from George Hegel, who was a German philosopher and idealist. This quote from him sums up the idea very well. Truth is found neither in the thesis nor the antithesis, but in an emergent synthesis which reconciles the two. So here's a simple breakdown of the Hegelian dialectic model. Thesis versus antithesis equals synthesis. Two seemingly opposite forces or ideas come into conflict with each other. These opposites are fought over until a compromise is reached. However, according to this philosophy, what needs to be understood is that the compromise was the desired outcome all along. We see this drama played out in politics, the media, and even religion. It's why in America we have only two viable political parties. You have to side with one or the other, resulting in the familiar maxim of voting for the lesser of two evils. It's why there are only two sides to any particular story in the mainstream media. If you're looking for an alternative point of view, you have to actively search it out or stumble upon it by accident on alternative media sites and public forums such as YouTube, which themselves are becoming increasingly more restrictive of Christian, conservative, and conspiratorial content that does not align with the mainstream media narrative. I don't want to veer off topic too much, but I believe this is an important observation we need to make in our video series, and as good time as any to interject it. The Hegelian dialectic will be a continuing theme we see played out through our examination of the New World Order. So once again, here's the statue in front of the EU Parliament building in France. We also see a similar sculpture outside the other European Union Parliament, this one in Brussels, Belgium. But Europe and EU politics are not the only places we see the images of the woman riding the beast. It's also been featured in American pop culture at the most watched event in the U.S., the Super Bowl. This is an image from Super Bowl 49. While the Super Bowl's main attraction is that it pits the two final remaining NFL teams against each other for the championship of professional football, it also has for many years now featured some of the top musical entertainers to perform at its much-hyped halftime show. This particular show featured Katy Perry, and while her music and music videos certainly contain a lot of occult/New Age lyrics and imagery, it is what she is doing here that should be obvious to you now. And I know she's not riding a bull or a beast or a dragon with 7 heads or 10 horns, much like the earlier objection we addressed. But let's also bring up this objection. She was just performing her song Roar, which contains the lyrics, "I got the eye of the tiger." The tiger being the animal for which this mechanical beast she is atop resembles. So again, before we jump to conclusions, we want to look for confirmation when we see imagery like this. I think we have it here. This is the official image for Katy Perry's song Rise. This is the featured pic on the Wikipedia page for this song. Now, what does this have to do with a woman sitting on or riding a beast? Again, we turn to the book of Revelation, this time chapter 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So what do you think? Is this connection too much of a stretch? I've made the case, but I'm sure not everyone watching this will agree, and ultimately you have to be the one to decide what you will do with this information. Will you be willing to dig deeper and seek out the truth wherever it leads you? Or will you be content with what you're being told in the media and our culture at large? Jesus said in Matthew 7, verse 7 and 8, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened." We also read in James 1:5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." So if you get nothing else from this video or any of the videos in this series, regardless of whether you accept the information or conclusions arrived at, I want you to get this concept. Question everything. If Jesus Christ really is the Savior, the Son of God, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, then the evidence will bear this truth out. If the New World Order really is a biblical truth prophesied thousands of years ago by God Himself, then the evidence will speak for itself. It's more than worthy of your time to investigate the claims made in the Bible. For the Christian, it will undoubtedly strengthen your faith and trust in this inspired, God-breathed book. For the unbeliever, earnestly seeking true meaning and purpose, it will change your life forever. It's okay. The Bible can handle the scrutiny. It stood the test of time of all recorded human history. It can withstand any critical examination we put it to. So let's put it to the test, and you and I will be better for it. In our next video, we'll be looking at the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and a few other groups. I was hoping to get to them in this video, but there were some important points I didn't want us to overlook and that are relevant to information we'll be taking a look at moving forward. So until next time, thanks for watching and keep examining.